Nissan Motorsport, more commonly known as NISMO, has made itself seen at Le Mans more than a handful of times, be it with the incredible but compromised Group C era insanity that was the R89C and R90 series prototypes, or the more recent daring insanity of the DeltaWing. NISMO is no stranger to racing. They had raced a modified Skyline in 1995, but quickly realised that a purpose-built racing machine was the only way to be competitive in the GT1 class. And so it began. The late 90s were exciting times for Le Mans. Development was happening quickly, and Nissan, who had been running the Skyline GTR LM, quickly found themselves in a field populated by purpose-built GT1 cars, like the Mercedes CLK GTR and Porsche 911 GT1. Though Nissan had never seen too much success in Sarth, the dream never died, and work began to build something to prove that Mazda wasn't the only Japanese brand capable of victory there. NISMO quickly sought the expertise of Tom Walkinshaw Racing to help develop the car. TWR were well versed in the ways of Le Mans, having worked closely with a number of teams over the years, including building Jaguar's barnstorming 1988 Le Mans winning XJR9. Nissan weren't messing around. The Skyline GTR they had raced in 1995 sported a modified version of Nissan's beloved RB26 inline 6-cylinder engine. The Skyline had of course made a name for itself in Group A racing a few years before, but it was archaic tech by the standards of LMGT1, and so step one was to replace the engine. Luckily, Nissan happened to have just the thing in storage: the V8 from the 1989 R89C Group C car. They modified it slightly, and the output came to a substantial 641 horsepower. Pretty potent power output for a car that only weighed 1100 kilograms. Named in line with a 60s tradition that started with the R380, this new track monster was named the R390 GT1. The styling of the car was led by Ian Callum of Tom Walkinshaw Racing, who worked in tandem with the legendary Tony Southgate on the mechanical and aerodynamic side of things, a TWR veteran already famous by this point for his contributions to Jaguar's Group C campaign. The team wasn't given much time to develop the car, as was the way with most GT1 projects, simply due to the breakneck speed of technological advancement at the time. And so TWR had to search through its parts bins. It's no coincidence that the R390 bears some resemblance to the brutally quick Jaguar XJR15. In fact, much of the cabin was manufactured using the same tooling. That being said, it is important to clarify that the R390 wasn't just an XJR15 in some new clothes. Pretty much everything other than the cabin was completely different. The use of an existing engine and some of the tooling that had been used to create the XJR15 meant that the R390 was developed extremely quickly, even by GT1 standards. But there was still one hurdle left to overcome: homologation. Yes, like many of the most insane cars of the late 1990s, the Nissan R390 was blessed with a road-homologated production car to meet GT1 class rules. Unlike Mercedes and Porsche, however, who built a small number of customer cars in the form of the CLK GTR and the 911 GT1 Strassen version, Nissan didn't see the point in doing more than the absolute bare minimum, and so they only built one of them. It used the same 3.5-litre twin-turbocharged V8 as its racing counterparts, though its power output was cut back to just 550 horsepower, although this is sometimes quoted as 350, all of which was directed at the rear wheels through a 6-speed transmission. It was claimed that this road version could achieve a top speed of 220 miles an hour. However, Nissan chose never to actually test this. The original 1997 car was painted red, but it was reworked in 1998 to update it with some of the changes made to the Le Mans cars, and at that time it was repainted to the iconic blue it's known for today. At least this is most likely. Some people insist that they made two cars, but I can't find much evidence for that other than the colour change, and they've never been in the same room. The R390 GT1 was ready for Le Mans 1997. Nissan had built and entered 3 cars into the event. Maybe this time they'd be successful, they thought. It didn't start out well. They ran into problems before the cars had even seen the track yet. All cars that race at Le Mans must be inspected by the ACO prior to the event to ensure compliance with the regulations of their class. All three of the R390s failed this scrutineering due to what Nissan called a misunderstanding about the regulations. This resulted in last-minute modifications to the cars to make sure they would be able to compete, but of course, this didn't go well. Despite a strong qualifying performance, the R390 was doomed to fail. The modifications done to the rear of the car to bring it in line with the regulations, which I believe were to do with the storage requirements, meant that all three cars were plagued with cooling difficulties. This issue, which primarily affected the gearbox, forced two of the three cars to retire from the race, and the last car standing unsurprisingly also suffered transmission issues, but soldiered on to finish the race in 12th place. Despite the setback, the R390's strong qualifying performance had instilled hope in Nissan that 1998 could be different, and so they made sure to read the rules properly and they gave it another shot. For 1998, the cars were modified to increase downforce. This was done by lengthening the bodywork at the rear, installing a brand new rear diffuser and changing the position of the rear wing in order to try and reduce drag on the straights. Nissan chose to race 4 of these new, modified R390s in 1998, and no doubt NISMO kept their fingers crossed that the previous year didn't repeat itself. This time, they all passed the ACO checklist. It turns out that reading the rules can be advantageous after all, and so they were ready to race. The R390s were easily beaten by their rivals Mercedes and Porsche during qualifying, but put on a good show nonetheless. On race day, all 4 managed to finish, coming 3rd, 5th, 6th and 10th overall, beaten only by the monstrous Porsche 911 GT1. But a podium finish in the world's toughest circuit race is no small feat. And to have achieved it ahead of McLarens, Mercedes, Toyotas and Ferraris surely meant that Nissan weren't barking up completely the wrong tree. They had thrown together a race car in next to no time at all, and who knows, if they read the rules properly the first time, they might even have had a winner on their hands. But it didn't turn out that way. Nissan weren't finished yet though. The GT scene was changing, and Nissan were happy to change along with it. Well, not quite. For 1999, the GT1 class at Le Mans was no more, making way for LMGTP, a closed cockpit prototype class that did away with the road homologation charade and returned the sport to the pure prototype days GT1 had replaced. That had gone swimmingly well. Toyota, Nissan's domestic rival, lightly modified their existing GT1 car to meet the new requirements, and so Nissan did the same. Right? Wrong! Nissan in fact developed a totally new car, not even competing in the GTP class, choosing instead to build and race an open-top LMP class car instead. This decision is completely baffling in retrospect, but at the time NISMO was convinced that a ground-up approach was the only way to ensure competitiveness. Oh, how wrong they were. The new car, creatively named the R391, ditched the 3.5-litre turbocharged V8 in favour of a more modern, naturally aspirated 5-litre V8, which produced an impressive 650 horsepower in racing trim. Unfortunately, TWR and the car design dream team were not involved with the R391 project. Instead, Nissan partnered with the UK division of G-Force Technologies, a firm with a solid resume and all the know-how required to make a capable prototype. With all the parts together, Nissan were ready to go racing again. The R391 was pretty middle of the road during testing, and if Nissan had been hoping to beat Toyota, they'd bet on the wrong horse. The closed cockpit cars had better aerodynamic characteristics and often higher top speeds. A fact not much liked by 1999's Mercedes drivers, a couple of whom had a unique experience with said speed, though I imagine they were at least grateful for the roof. Things weren't a whole lot better in one of Nissan's 2 roofless cars either, unfortunately, as car number 23 in the hands of Eric van der Poel had a pretty big smash in qualifying, totally wrecking the car and putting the driver in hospital. Nissan were down to 1 car for the big day. Well, actually it was 2 cars, as they had bought a Courage C52 just in case their car was shit. While the lack of confidence is off-putting, it did turn out to be a prudent decision. The single R391 retired less than a third of the way through the race with an engine failure, Their C52 finished the race a respectable 8th. It had been an embarrassing show from Nissan, made worse by their arch-rival Toyota fighting at the front in one of the most fascinating battles in Le Mans history. To sprinkle a little extra salt in the wound, that battle was won by the theoretically slower open-cockpit BMW V12 LMR that was running in the same class as Nissan had been. They had no excuse, and as a result, Nissan abandoned Le Mans for a long time. I would have too. The R391 would make one last appearance though before quietly being shoveled into the history books, competing in the 1999 Le Mans Fuji 1000 at Japan's historic Fuji circuit. In this race, I have to imagine hopes were not very high. Le Mans hadn't gone well, and Toyota would be running their TS020 in this event too, but in spite of the skepticism, Nissan surprised everyone. I imagine even themselves. They won the race. No technicalities or caveats, the R391 won, beating Toyota on their shared home turf. This gave the R391 a win rate of 50%. That was good enough for Nissan, who promptly abandoned their prototype racing program and left it that way for over a decade. Nissan's Group C escapades were far more expansive and successful too. Check out that story here. This video was available to watch early for channel members. Click the join button below. A big thank you to existing channel members for supporting Automobilistic. Thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye.